Good morning. Welcome to the Restart Michigan webinar with Plante Moran. This is Kimberly Blackman, Coordinator of Engagement with the Detroit Regional Chamber. Thank you for joining this session. The Chamber has launched a series of webinars to help businesses across the state prepare to restart operations and return to work. I would like to thank our guest speakers from Plante Moran for volunteering their time to share their expertise. Before we get started, I want to make you all aware all participants are on mute. But you do have the option to submit questions directly to the speakers through the Go to Webinar Control panel. I will now turn the webinar over to Mr. Tim Weed. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kimberly, and good morning, everybody on the call here. Our objective today is to kind of walk through some things that we've seen be successful for companies. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about what's changed over here in the last 3 or 4 months, and then get into some ideas and strategies that you might want to consider for your business. So what Sean's going to probably put up here, and Sean Pattison's my cohort here. We'll be sharing the talking duties. I think the next slide. What I wanted to start off with was a quote from Peter Drucker, who is a relatively famous management consultant who's been advising people for decades, and he's passed away several years ago. But it was about the idea that change is unavoidable. Like none of us would have expected what we have in front of us. We might prefer it to be differently, but we are in a time that we have to just figure out how we can do the best we can to adapt to that. So this is what today's discussion is about, is what can you do to adapt your business to the changes that have been wrought by the COVID-19. So let's start off going back what I like to call the good old days. This is literally back in February of 2020, if you can recall that far back. We had historic lows when it comes to unemployment. We had so many job openings that it was hard to find staff for jobs, and that was true both in the Detroit area, the Michigan area, and across the country. The consumer confidence was again at a very high level, and our overall economy was growing. Stock market had been very strong. Things seemed to be clicking along very well. We had a nice 10-year run of growth under both administrations, and so things seem to be going well. There was certainly some talk about this issue in China with the coronavirus, but most of us had probably not thought about it too much. So fast forward really just a few months, we take a look in May of 2020, and this is the new reality that we face. We've got unemployment at record high. It's even worse, way worse than it was back in 2008, which many of us remember was a very tough time, particularly around the Detroit marketplace because of the automotive concentration and the challenges that we face there. But the numbers we've got now are even higher than that. They're a little bit lower than they were in April, but they're still stunningly high. And so it's a very tough job market right now. Beyond that, there are some people that are hiring, but most companies are more in a hiring freeze. They're still trying to figure out who they can bring back from furlough, and that's a great time to be trying to find a new job. The consumers are much less confident than they were back in February. Again, we've seen it was worse in 2008. So we're sort of in that unknown territory, and we're expecting the economy to contract quite a bit here this year. So it's just a completely different set of circumstances that businesses find themselves in.
Yeah, so despite Tim's doom and gloom of this new reality, the recession that we're in with no clear recovery path, everyone is asking how long will it last, and no one really knows. But the government has stepped in to infuse support, and they did it with really a number of different programs, aimed to help both companies, small and large, so either through the PPP or some of their other loan programs that they have out there, but then also to help individuals through the increase in unemployment and some other things they've done to stimulate or help individuals kind of manage through this. As Tim mentioned, unemployment's up, and some other things are making it a challenge for both companies and individuals. There's also new guidance that is continually coming out regarding the PPP loans and the forgiveness calculation or calculator. And it seems like they're making it easier for forgiveness and applying, but it seems like we also get new guidance basically every day or every week out of the Fed on how to do that or what's allowed or not allowed. So one thing we did notice though, during this, I'll call it lockdown or the initial phase of this recession, is there were critical or these deemed essential goods and services that have done well during the pandemic. And as people continue to adapt to the lockdowns, some technologies have done very well. Everyone I talk to seems to watch every show on Netflix, and I think my kids have seen every on-demand movie that's available for them. So I know Netflix and Amazon and maybe even Zoom and some other technology companies have been doing really well during this period. And some of the other areas or industries haven't done as bad as you would have thought. So grocery stores during a lockdown, I think might be hard to hit the grocery stores, but they've been doing very well, and same with traditional food companies. And car retailers or retail car dealers are only down 40%, which seems to be somewhat positive given the nature of where things were or have been. So this next slide, we're really kind of aiming to talk about this lingering uncertainty or the many unknowns of the virus still. So there is no vaccine or preventative medicine timelines, those are still uncertain. And every day we get new information on what states are doing well. Sounds like Michigan's doing fairly well, but then what states are seeing either a second wave or a daily uptick. I've heard of Arizona and Georgia being on that list. And how this virus infection rate changes over the summer and into the fall is still unknown. And companies and individuals will need to monitor this closely, as companies will need to continually address and plan for what PPE they'll need and how to have safe working environments, for their employees. We also have kind of continued global economic tension across the world, and maybe what I'll describe as political and media tension here in the US that makes the uncertainty of the virus, but also the recession and the recovery a little bit more challenging. And at the bottom line though, when will consumers return to or feel the return to normal? There's various studies out on when that will be. I think I saw a recent one saying some consumers expect not to return to normal not until 2021. So not throughout this whole year and into next year, which they will have kind of lasting effects on business and how people are able to turn around their business and succeed. So here we have another quote, famous quote from Winston Churchill. I thought it was relevant given the current situation, and because of this situation, really does give companies a unique opportunity to define their business strategy, and make business model changes to adapt to the new norm or living with the pandemic and address the changes that maybe they should have made years ago. And it just gives people that opportunity to do things differently.
So we want to switch into now more of specifics around this. So when we think about what's happened with COVID, we've all through our lives likely experienced one or more recessions. And so when we think about the COVID recession playbook, we really want to think about three different things we want to talk about. First thing was, well, how ready were you? How ready was your company? Given the fact that we had such a long run of economic expansion, some companies had been thinking that we were likely going to hit a recession. I'm sure no one in their worst nightmare thought it was going to be what we've seen so far. But one question would be is how ready were you? The second concept, what we'll get to in a minute, is what is it you can do now in your business to adjust? And then the third topic is more about where are there new opportunities out there for you and your business. So let's turn to the first one. How ready were you? So what we have here is sort of 5 different dimensions of a business. And so the question, we want to go through these one at a time, is from a competitive standpoint, how well do you know who your competition is? How well do you know what their strengths and weaknesses are? Like, why is it that people buy your goods or come to your store or use your services? Having a clear understanding of how you measure up against others gives you some sense of what's going to happen during this recession and how you might have an advantage or a disadvantage against who your competitors are. Second thing is on the cost structure. For many businesses that are operating and making money, they continue to try to strive to do better, but they don't always sort of think about like, what is my break-even point in any given week or month or even year? Like, so with the change in what's happened, do you have a better handle on what it's going to be, what your new break-even point would be? When you start cutting costs, there's usually cuts to both variable cost and fixed cost. Having a good appreciation of what that is an important aspect of being able to figure out how to survive. The other piece is, depending on what kind of industry you're in, how this new situation might affect both how your competitors bid against you. So having a good handle on your cost help you know how low can you go in a bid, what's still going to provide you some profits. And then there'll be times probably where your customers may come to you and say, hey, we're getting pressure. We need to figure out how much you can reduce your cost. You need to make sure you understand your costs so you don't inadvertently give away whatever profit you have and get into a losing proposition with your customers. The third thing has to do with, I'll call it the environment you work in, both your customers and your suppliers. How well are they doing? How well are they surviving? Making sure that if you've got concerns about your customers, that you manage that credit risk so that you don't inadvertently provide them goods or services and then don't get paid for that. Similarly with your suppliers, making sure that they're going to be around to provide you whatever goods and services you need to run your business. And if they're not going to survive, who are your alternatives? Who do you need to go to? The fourth thing has to do with just your liquidity. A lot of banks or other people have been asking businesses to do what's called a 13-week cash flow forecast. That's a sort of a very fundamental thing that many bankers will ask for, that ask you to take a look and take your best estimate of what money is going to be coming in the door, what money is going to be going out the door on a week-by-week basis over the course of a quarter, and if there is ability to borrow on a line of credit, like what that looks like. So it's a very good tool to have. Many of you may manage your cash both by looking at just at your checkbook and how much money you have and only look out a week or two. But this liquidity discipline of looking out a full quarter is something that helps identify where there might be some bumps in the road, if there's going to be a gap where that is. And then the fifth thing is really gets into like who's working for you, how capable are they able to shift the business and make changes, and implement the contingency plan that you may have had when you think about the downturn that we're experiencing.
All right, so this next slide.
Oh, go ahead, John. Yeah, sorry.
Is really talking about what can you do now. So this is looking at, Tim had just mentioned where you were leading into this. Now we're going to address what can you do now. And, the first one we called out is the sensitivity analysis. So we like to recommend this to companies even before the recession hit and the pandemic hit, but certainly now. And that is, have you done a worst case scenario? Have you looked at, as Tim mentioned, your break-even point, your different cost structures, your variable and fixed costs, and what is your top line look like, and then how does your company manage through that? So on your worst case scenario, that can be different for each business, each industry. They'll all have a different type of worst case scenario depending on where you operate in, who your customers are, and what really drives your demand. But also, as you think about doing a sensitivity analysis, you can do it for the different types of recoveries. So there is the U-shape, maybe a Nike swoosh recovery, a jagged W recovery, or an L type recovery. So thinking about, how does your business perform during those types of recoveries, and what's your sensitivity analysis show? What kind of results do you get different recoveries? And if some of those results aren't good enough for you and your company, then what do you need to do to address those, to make changes today or now before it's too late? So some other areas you can look at are your cost structure. So what are your lingering costs that are going to be hard to move or not change, and what are some other ones that you can trim right away or address right away? And the ones that are hard to move and not, think about what can you do to change those and make those something that you're able to address, based on your sensitivity analysis or based on what you think your forecast would be. Another area we like to think about is, your headcount requirement. So, is this a good time to what I call right size the company? Have you had low performers with your company for too long? Do you have any sacred cows that have been with you and things that you've been afraid or not able to address or review or even cut? And now's a good time to say, okay, we're in a recession. No one knows what the recovery looks like. We're uncertain on how things are going to be the rest of this year. We need to make maybe more drastic changes than we've had to do in the past. Another thing that we mentioned on bullet 4 is what other discretionary spending that you have been making or are still currently making that can either be delayed or at least evaluate, is this a critical spend that I need to do, a nice to have, or is it a need to have? And if they're nice to have, then maybe those should be postponed or evaluated whether they still make sense to do. And, because once money or cash leaves the company, it's gone and it's hard to get that back. So holding on to cash and making sure that you're spending money in the right spots, is critical during this period.
Hey, Sean, can I just interject something as I'm looking at what you just went through and sort of thinking about this a little bit more? I guess
Yep.
what I would say the theme here would be try to prepare for what is potentially a bunch of different kinds of futures, but it almost seems like you're saying challenge every assumption you have on how you run your business and what you think it means to both sell different products and services and how you deliver them, what it takes to do that. That would be one thing. The second thing I would think about is if we're talking to people who are owners on the call, certainly you're the one with the ultimate decision making ability and authority to do these things. What I'm also struck with at times is some businesses that have got, I'll say, very good relationships with either their top line supervisors or even throughout the whole company have kind of taken the idea of saying, hey, look, we're trying to figure out how we're going to survive this. We really are trying to encourage the rest of the employees to come up with ideas. So I think most of the time owners have got a pretty good idea of almost everything in their business, but all of us have blind spots. And so it might be the kind of thing where you even think, boy, what do I need to do to encourage more people, whether it's the top line supervisors or other people, come up with ideas on how to do things differently. So that would be, it's not specifically in this document, but strikes me that would be a good thing to at least consider. And again, each business might have a different way of going about doing this, but just something for folks on the call to think through. So I just wanted to chime in with that since that just came to my mind.
Yeah, Tim, actually, that made me think of something else too that we've worked with other companies on. That's doing really a bottoms up budget. So starting with, the very basic blocks of your company and kind of building a budget up from the bottom. Say, okay, what's critical that we need to spend? What's critical that we need to have, and really formulate your budget and forecast that way versus taking your historic run rates. Because sometimes when you're in situations that we're in right now, historically was the past and doesn't actually mean as much to the future based on where we're at. So looking at doing your budgeting or forecasting differently might be helpful in a situation like this.
Yeah. The other thing that's been interesting to me is when I think about how most people have done their sales and marketing in the past and how this new reality of us really not being able to go see people in person, in some cases has revealed interesting outcomes for businesses that said, hey, we didn't go to the annual conference, but we still were able to, meet people over Zoom or different kinds of calls, and we've still been able to make sales and pitch people on our products or services. So, in the past, someone would say, I need to go to this conference. We need to spend $5,000 to go, and I'm going to be out of the office for three days. Now suddenly people are realizing that maybe that wasn't necessarily the best way to do things. It was the traditional way that they had done it for years. It seemed to be what they should do in the future. But now we've got people starting to question whether what they did in the past still needs to happen in the future. So anyways, I don't know if I'm taking you off a path here, but those are just some of the things that came to mind to me on this.
No, yeah, good input. All right, so now we move to our next slide. We really call out or think about where are the new opportunities. So, I was thinking back to some of my high school football days when we talk about a good defense can also lead to a good offense. So here we are, we had done all the things, correct in the prior two slides to get our company on a good standing or a good position. And maybe we can be in a position to be opportunistic and identify, what opportunities exist out there and how we can, capture those. And I almost think back to the quote from Winston Churchill, never let a good crisis go to waste. So if we've done the right things and put ourselves in a good position, let's use this crisis to our benefit and do things that we can do to grow and actually become stronger out of this. So what are some areas where opportunities might exist? Well, you might be able to gain market share from your competitors. Your competitors may be struggling and have different issues or challenges that you can, underbid or go after their customers or expand your current customers that you're not getting all the sales or programs or platforms for. And also take an opportunity to increase the talent at your company. So work on getting the right people on board in the right roles. And you may take those from competitors or from people that have now been laid off that are kind of questioning the work they're doing or the companies they've been at. Go out there and look for how can we get better talent or the right talent at our company. Then our third bullet is really talking about play to the customer's fears. So I like to describe it as let's stay extra close with our customers, really talk and listen to them and help them solve their issues or understand what their issues are. Are they having delivery issues? Do they have quality issues with their other suppliers? Are they not getting the service that they expect to get? What challenges are they having right now during this period? And how can you play to those fears and help them solve their issues and hopefully grow your relationship with your customers to get more business, get more work from them, and continue down the path of growing and building a relationship with them. And then our last bullet we also mentioned is supplier terms and CapEx investments. And what flexibility do we have on that? So if we've already committed to certain things, can we go back to the suppliers and the different people we're working with to get either better payment terms or get better pricing depending on where they're at and how flexible in your relationship with them. One thing I like to think about is if you put yourself in the right position, it's going to take advantage of these opportunities. So if you don't take advantage of this crisis and do these things, some or all of your competitors will, and that might put them in a stronger position down the road and leave you kind of left behind and the one that's struggling more. So I think it's a good opportunity to get the company in the right position and start taking advantage of this crisis and these opportunities that will start arising as we go through this recession and into the recovery.
Yeah, Sean, I could think of two examples of people I've talked to in the last probably 2 weeks on this area. One of them was a company that was in the, and this actually goes back to 2008. 2008, they had been on a continual growth curve. And even though they knew 2008 and 9 weren't going to be great for them, they had plans to actually build a new building to help house, kind of consolidate some of all their operations into one building. And so they continued with that investment through that recession. And because it was such a down time for construction, they were able to get very attractive pricings for that capital investment and didn't have any trouble getting it done on time because most of the contractors and subcontractors were all available to do the work. So for them, it was having some strength allowed them to invest and actually get something done on time. And so for them, it was a benefit. And I just talked to them about right now, they're trying to figure out, again, they're in pretty strong position. They're trying to figure out what they could do in terms of more investments here because they expect that for the most part, their customers have continued to buy their type of product. And it just happens to be something that hasn't been significantly negative impacted by the COVID. And the other one was somebody who is a manufacturer that had never thought about the PPE, the personal protection equipment. But during this last 3 months, they've actually redeployed some of their people and some of their capital, and they've made masks, and I think they've generated probably close to $1 million of revenue out of that. So they continue to generate some revenue when they couldn't generate revenue from their normal customers, and also deployed their people. So thinking creatively is a good idea, and this is just some examples that I'm aware of personally.
Yeah, good examples, Tim.
Okay, so I think we're moving into the next section here, which is, again, I'll call it challenge everything. So this is a quote. I'm not sure it's even a quote, but that concept was when Cortez came to the New World. The theory was that he burned the ships because he wanted his men to be motivated to go out and explore and do what they needed to do for king and country. So what we're suggesting here is sort of, again, maybe strip the business down to the basics and try to think, what would you do differently? If you flip to the next slide, we want to talk about a few concepts, and then Sean will get into a little bit more detail on them. So as you're restarting your business, we've got 4 things here we want to talk about. One is, again, think about your financial and your operational parts of your business. There's going to be lots of different potential recoveries out there, depending on both what happens with the general economy, what happens with any kind of vaccine, what happens with whether there's any kind of second wave or third wave. So making sure you have an appreciation for how any of that stuff might affect your customer demand, and then how you need to adjust your business to that, is going to be critical for you to make sure you don't get either caught short and not have enough people in inventory, or the other way, have too many people and too much inventory and not enough sales. So it's going to be very, very dicey situation here in the near term on how to best balance out the old supply and demand from our economics 101. So I'd be very flexible as much as you can be, so you don't get caught unawares. The second thing has to do, again, goes back to the contingency planning for what's happening in your supply chain, and again, broader than that, in what we call business ecosystems. Anyone else outside the organization that you depend on, either to sell things or to help deliver and provide things, you need to make sure you understand how they're doing, so that you don't get caught short with a customer going out of business or a supplier going out of business, and suddenly you're left in the lurch. Third thing, again, is continually to make sure you have a good awareness of what your liquidity looks like through this 13-week cash flow forecast, or whatever else you use to sort of monitor and manage your customers and your suppliers and your employees and other kinds of bank commitments. Just making sure you have a good handle on that, so you don't run into a situation where suddenly you don't have enough money to cover payroll, don't have enough money to cover the rent. If you run into situations where it gets sticky, you probably want to reach out to your bank and see what is it they could do to help you. If a bank knew that 3 weeks from now you're going to be tight on cash, that's one conversation. When you call the bank and say, I need money for payroll tomorrow, that's a different conversation. So nobody likes surprises, the least of which is your banker. So have a tool that you can use to sort of monitor and manage that. And lastly is, as Sean alluded to earlier, there are a lot of different programs out there, both at a federal and a state level and even local level. So I'd stay plugged in. I'm sure the Chamber's got information that they could share if they have on any new programs that come through that they're aware of. So make sure you look for and sign up for those things. If you don't ask, you don't get it. So I'd be very much of the mind to think about that on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, Tim, one thing I was going to add on the excess liquidity and the 13-week cash flow is thinking about what things you can do to be proactive versus reactive. So what things can you do, and like you said with the bank and the surprises, but being proactive to have a 13-week cash flow, looking at what your recovery and forecasts look like, and what can you do to get ahead of things versus waiting till things happen to you and being reactive. So I think that's another thing to consider as you either develop these tools or start using these tools, knowing like what things, because you do things sooner, you may have the chance to make changes to affect it versus being reactive and letting things happen to you.
Yeah, I think
And I
there's.
guess one other,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One other point on 13-week cash flow. It's also on the recovery and the top line. Thinking about your working capital and making sure you're matching, generating sales to generate AR and then collecting your AR versus the timing of having to pay your suppliers. So we've worked with a couple of companies recently where they've seen their ramp up come and they've actually had pretty decent sales out of the gates, but now they're bumping up against their borrowing base top line or collateral max, but they still have bills due to their vendors. So they're getting squeezed a little bit by doing better than they originally thought because they're not able to borrow enough money on their borrowing base to make payments for some of these vendors. So they're getting in a tight spot where they need to kind of work with the bank on that max, but then also with some of their vendors to delay payments a little bit or stretch them out a little bit further than they historically were.
Yeah, I wouldn't even assume that everyone is doing the basic blocking and tackling. Frankly, I sent something last night to someone where there was a small receivable that seemed like it was very stale. I wasn't sure why it wasn't paid, and found out that someone just forgot to put it in their system. And so once they knew that it was an obligation, they committed to making the payment within the next week. So when you're thinking about receivables, some of the basic blocking and tackling of following up on things that are past due is a good practice. Following up to make sure that they have if you have an important invoice that gets sent to a customer, making sure that they acknowledge they have it. If you have any questions, I don't know how many times we've had situations where companies are doing business with very large companies, and if there's one mistake on their invoice, it gets kicked out of the system and it doesn't get paid. And so if you know about that, you can try to address it sooner. So at some level, some of these things come back to just, again, think through, don't assume, make sure you check things, ask for people's help, ask for people's commitment. Doesn't mean they're gonna be able to follow through, but better to try to do the much as you can. You hate to leave any stone unturned, and I think that's what we're saying with this.
Yeah. All right, our next slide, we call it the $1 million question. So we've talked about the recovery on a few of our other slides, but the $1 million question is what kind of recovery will happen? So I think everybody from Wall Street to economics to businesses to everybody's trying to figure out what will our recovery be. So we've charted out 3 different recovery shapes: the V shape, W shape, and U shaped. I think everyone's pretty familiar with these recoveries now as CNBC and all the financial news continue to talk about them. But the V-shaped recoveries, rapid decline with a rapid increase. So we go low really fast and then we come back and get back to, I'll call it the normal, very fast. W shape is a little more interesting where it goes down fast, we get a quick return, and then followed by a second decline. And there could be a lot of different things that would drive that to happen. Could be the phase 2 or the resurgence of the pandemic, could be other global political items, and it could just be other companies failing to recover quickly. And then our U-shaped is gradual decline, a longer bottom with a gradual increase. So this is a slower recovery on the back end, and a lot of people think something like this could be what we're going to be dealing with. And I think we mentioned earlier in the slide, like the Nike swoosh. So there are some variations that fall kind of in between these different recoveries that people are also monitoring and analyzing and forecasting. And one other thing to also consider, going down to the company level is recoveries might vary by industry or sector, and even at a state by state level. So, depending on if there is a second wave or even lockdowns or a second lockdown in the fall based on the second wave or where the pandemic is, you could see recoveries, by state be different, based on those different factors. We've already seen with some of the May numbers, different recoveries happening, or at least starting to happen. So the May retail recovered much better than, expectations. Housing new starts, were slower than a lot of people thought were going to happen. And as we start Q3 and some of the government support wears off, you got to start questioning, will banks start putting more pressure on their customers? Will they not be as lenient anymore as we've seen the last few months? And will companies be able to act fast enough to make, sometimes tough decisions or decisions to get in good standing with their banks and, be able to manage through this recovery?
Hey, Sean,
Yeah.
that the screen's so small on my computer. When do you get to 100% recovery under those three scenarios? What are the dates that those things occur?
Yeah, so right now, these recovery shapes, the V is kind of in the Q4 of 2020, and then the W and U shape almost get there by Q4 2021. So they're just below the 100% all the way out at Q4 2021.
Okay, so it's a pretty sizable difference, a year difference in terms of when the recovery would occur. Okay.
Yeah, back to the normal 100%. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right. If we move to the next slide, so we have a few slides about rethinking about your business model. Oh wait, hold on. Oh, sorry. And for the first one, we talked about employees. So what do we need to do, or what do you need to do with your business model and rethinking about how your employees interact and kind of manage through in the new norm? So we've listed, a handful of questions for consideration and for companies to think about. And the first one is really related to this social distancing, employee fears, and what I really like to summarize it as, what are the spacing considerations and overall space considerations? So, how much space do we need in the future? And, will people prefer or demand or want to work from home all the time, more of the time? And how will that affect, the real estate or the space considerations that companies need in the future? The second bullet is really on the managing employees, and I almost view it as kind of the cultural effect. So everyone talks about the company culture and how we manage and all work together. Well, how will that change in this new world? And if people are more working from home or we're having more virtual meetings or Zoom meetings, how will that change the culture, and what will that look like in the future, and how will companies be able to kind of manage through that? And also with your hiring and onboarding. So, we've heard of companies either delaying hiring of employees, or if they had new starts that were supposed to start over the summer or end of summer, are they delaying those new starts because of not wanting to bring a bunch of new people into offices that are currently closed and not up and running full time? So how will we do that in the future? How will companies be able to hire and onboard, in a virtual or a semi-virtual atmosphere? And then the last one is the real estate, which I guess I covered a little bit more on the space consideration. So how much time will you need to spend in it? Will offices go back to 100% capacity, or will they have a 50% capacity or some lesser amount? And then will we need to think about, do we need to get rid of office space, or how do we manage through that? And how can we be effective with our office space if we're not having all the amenities that maybe we did have before in the pre-COVID world? Okay.
And then sort of turning now to the customers on the technology side, it's sort of with what's happening today with this, with your business, whether you're in the business of providing goods or services or both, what are our customers' expectations now in terms of how you get that to them, how you deliver that to them, how much has that changed from what it was before? How do you need to adapt your business? As far as new customers, I mentioned before about if you don't have conventions, how do you go after and get new work? If that was one of your strategies in the past, it's again, how do you go out and find new people? How do you get more people to come to your business, whether it's through the website or other means? In the manufacturing and distribution business, particularly, you're seeing a lot of the whole concept of reshoring to North America. The USMCA, which is some people call it NAFTA 2.0, is going into effect on July 1st of this year. The expectation is there'll likely be some more activity that previously was overseas, maybe even Asia, shifting back to the United States and Mexico. How is that going to potentially benefit people that are in those types of industries or supply chains? As Sean mentioned, just like today, we're doing all this via technology. What are the needs you have for your business to be able to support reaching out to customers, employees, suppliers, the world? Like, do you have enough assets? Do you have enough people? Do you have enough technology? Do you have enough bandwidth? Those are things that you need to sort of re-challenge what you had in the past. You may have to spend more money on that in the future, but you might be able to save money, as Sean said, on real estate and other things. Other thing is just many businesses that, almost every business of any size has got a website. Most or many customers want to know what you're doing in terms of managing and protecting them as customers. Some people are interested in how you're managing, protecting your employees and other people. So, sort of having people talk up and people know what your COVID policy is an important aspect of some businesses. So it's, again, something new that would not have been something on anyone's radar prior to the appearance of the coronavirus. So those are other things you might want to rethink about. So the last thought I want to sort of leave you with is something that's sort of interesting. Think about this. This crisis is going to challenge all of us. Companies that are weak already, they're probably going to get destroyed by this. They're not going to be able to survive. They're not going to have enough resources and to get through that. Most companies, good companies, are going to survive through this. They may get battered, but they'll make it through. And then great companies are improved by them. And the great companies, why do they get improved by them? They go back and re-challenge everything that they did in the past and figure out what they should do differently now. And many people are aware that there's been a lot of famous companies that have been created during whatever recession or depression you want to talk about. So Apple, I think, was invented back in the 1980, 79, 80, 81 timeframe when we had a recession in the United States. So there are many companies that have become world beaters out there that work through this. So our earnest request to you is to sort of look at your business, see what you might want to do differently, and challenge yourself and challenge your employees to think that way. So that's all we have. I don't see any questions pop up in the question box. Sean, I guess, are there any things that any final thoughts from you, or are there other things that you think businesses, maybe what are some of the mistakes people are making in this time? Are there things that you think of that someone else might want to do that's not been covered already by this topic?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it's a mistake, but one other thing to keep in mind is, and we mentioned a little bit with the customers, was really the communication plan. So I think as we think about customers, employees, stakeholders, all the constituents that companies have to deal with, it's really having a good communication plan and communicating with all those people, any changes or new requirements or different things that, like on the employee side, employees may have fears about going back to the office. So having better communication, upfront communication, and making it maybe a two-way street, so you can actually listen to your employees or your customers on what their either concerns are or fears are, and then you can react to those or have a plan to address those. I think will go a long way to build trust and build a relationship with your employees, customers, vendors, banks, anyone else that the company has to deal with, on a day-to-day basis, on a monthly or annual type basis. So it's just something that I thought of as you were kind of going over your final thoughts.
Okay, all right. Well, we're coming up against the end of this session anyways. Kimberly, I don't know if you want to come back in and provide any final thoughts on this point.
Hi, this is Kimberly Blackman from the Chamber to wrap up today's discussion. Thank you to the wonderful team from Plante Moran. To all the participants, thank you for your time today. You will soon receive an email from me with a link to today's discussion in case you want to review any of the information that was shared. The email will also include today's materials. Please visit our website, www.detroitchamber.com/COVID-19 for the upcoming schedules for the Restart Michigan webinars and our teletown halls. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you, everybody.